All right. Good morning, everybody. How is everybody? Good. I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. So we're going to pick up where we left off last week. If I can have everybody's attention, please. Real quick, though, before we do, I just want to do a little recap on what we talked about last week, Hebrews 1 and 2. Can anybody tell me what the main topic was that we discussed last week? Or I'm not last week, last time we met, Hebrews 1 and 2. Anybody remember? Without looking at the Bible? Okay, so last week what we discussed was what the main topic what we discussed was the importance of not drifting away. We did learn about identifying Jesus as the Son of God and his position compared to the angels. But what we really dialed in on was the importance of not drifting away. Hebrews 2, 1 through 4 says, "So we must listen very carefully to the truth we have heard." Everybody got their Bibles? Go ahead and open up to that real quick. Let's go to Hebrews 2, 1 through 4. Okay, picking it back up. "So we must listen very carefully to the truth we have heard, or we may drift away from it. For the message God delivered through angels has always stood firm, and every violation of the law and every act of disobedience was punished. So what makes us think that we can escape it if we ignore this great salvation that was first announced by the Lord Jesus himself and then delivered to us by those who heard him speak? And God confirmed the message by giving signs and wonders and various miracles and the gifts of the Holy Spirit wherever he chose." So what I believe the author here is explaining is that, or what he's telling us to do, is to make sure that we never ever forget the things that God has done, not just for us, but in front of us. The testimonies, the signs, the wonders, the miracles, the evidence in our life that he is in fact real. Because we get to those times where the truth is that the world has such a pull on us, the things that we desire. Think about the things that kept us, held up from ever coming to here in the first place, okay? And we're constantly in a war, right, between our flesh and our spirit. So we must never forget the things that God does for us in our lives, so that way we don't fall back into the people, places, things, the behaviors, and the stuff like that we used to do, and remain faithful, where God has us today and what he has us called to. We're all here for a reason. We can say we're just here to get a certificate, or we're just here, man, to stay clean, but it's deeper than that. And those of us who have had an encounter with God, right, know that. We know that we have a purpose here, not necessarily saying Life Changers Outreach, but in our walk with God as a son, right? He has a purpose for us. If we think back about the original mandate on our lives, right, it says to raise up disciples, right, across the nation. And so why we're here is we're learning how to discipline ourselves, we're learning how to grow in godly character, and we're learning how to become a disciple ourselves, so that way in return we can do the same for other people. We always seem to forget, right, that we were never created for ourselves. We were created from the very beginning of time for God, for relationship. Simple as that. Get everything else out of your mind. It wasn't for our own good pleasure. It was for God's good and perfect pleasure. So if we can wrap our minds around why we were created, then it'll just help us to be able to accept the fact that, we're here for a purpose. So we must never, ever, ever forget the things that God has done for us, because we are going to get in times where we're going to struggle, and we have to constantly remind ourselves so that way we stay in the will of the Father. Today we're going to discuss chapter 3 and 4. before we, and basically what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the rest of God. We're going to talk about what it means to not be in the rest of God, and we're going to talk about what it means to operate in the rest of God. But before we get started, I want to ask you guys a question. I want to open up and ask you, what does it mean to you to not rest in God? What does it mean to you to not be operating in the rest of God?
To me, basically anything that's like not operating out of the Spirit, out of a place of peace with a relationship with God, then you're I guess I can explain it the other way. Like acting off of your own abilities, your own skills, and exhausting yourself to the point that you don't really like know what else to do. That would be where I could see that I'm not operating out of a rest of God, because with His hand over what I'm doing, I don't get tired. I don't grow weary. It's not an exhausting activity that I'm performing. It's something that I enjoy. So.
Okay, very good. Anybody else? What does it mean to you to not operate out of the rest of God? What does it look like when you're not resting in God? We got Kurt over here. I know, Cody, you got something, don't you, Cody?
I mean, for me, it's just I start making poor decisions. I start seeing the separation between he and I, not praying as much, starting to do what I want to do instead of what he's called me to do.
Okay, good. Cody? Well, that's okay. Tell me what you think. I'm really, listen, there's no right or wrong answer here, guys. I'm really, like the rest of the teachers do, we just try to pick your brain. We just, not to call you out, but we just want to know. We want to know what you think, what your opinions are. What do you think, man?
So similar to what Jake said, operating in your own will, making decisions based off of selfish desires maybe, and then when you start doing stuff like that, slowly backsliding and easing out of the stuff that you were doing as far as like whatever you used to do to seek God all the time, however serious you were about it, the more stuff you choose not to do for God or against Him is when you start slowly easing back, and then more compromise comes and more sin comes until eventually you're just not participating at all or doing anything, and you're living in your complete own will again. And then I think once you start doing that, it's so much harder to get back to the place you were before. So.
That's good. And that was, go ahead. Yeah, that leads me to my next question is, what does that produce when you are not resting in God and you start making these compromises and you start not, flowing and functioning? What does that produce in your life? What does that produce in your mind? What does that produce?
You're trying to do things on your own and just kind of leaving it to God, to be able to give you rest and.
Okay. Cody, you got it again?
It'll produce bad fruit in your life.
Okay. Kyle, you want to pick it up? Then we'll pass it up here to James.
It's tormenting.
Bingo. That's spot on. Exactly what I was looking for.
Well, I don't feel like I should answer now.
Go ahead. No. Go ahead. No, listen, man.
Probably,
That's just one of the things. One of the things. Go ahead.
The first things I start to see are like bitterness and just like a negativity, negative aurora about you. You're looking at other people. You're picking them apart. You're finding something wrong with a day. It's just all kinds of negative qualities. Anything that the Spirit produces, you're producing the opposite.
Okay. What spirit do you think that comes from?
Selfishness.
A tormenting spirit. Let's look back at the life of David and Saul. Okay? All right. We see that Saul was no longer operating in the rest of God, right? The word actually says that his spirit departed from him, okay? And then it rested on David. And then so what happened was Saul began to get tormented through jealousy, bitterness, anger, frustration. It said he had an eye for him, right? And we look back at the story, and the guy was messed up. He was so messed up that he literally had to have this same person that he had an eye for come in with a harp and play music to calm his nerves. That's how bad dude was tormented, right? So I want us to understand that if we do not seek the Lord, right? If we don't learn how to function out of that place of rest with God, which comes through disciplines, it can be very easily to get caught up in a tormenting spirit. And it can literally, man, drive us crazy. We'll be sitting here thinking that it's everybody else's fault. And I'm not sitting here saying that, man, people don't do jacked up things, right? Because, you know, we live in a world of jacked up people, right? But it's our perception that changes, because we can't change the people around us, right? But we can change us. We can change the way we think. We can change the way we act. We can change the way we do things. So it's very important that we understand that. We're going to really get a little bit deeper into that. So, all right, let's go to Hebrews 3. I'm going to read through it, and then we're going to go back. All right. Excuse me. Picking up in verse 1, it says, "And so, dear brothers and sisters who belong to God and are partners with those called to heaven, think carefully about this Jesus whom we declare to be God's messenger and high priest. For he was faithful to God who appointed him, just as Moses served faithfully when he was entrusted with God's entire house. But Jesus deserves far more glory than Moses, just as a person who builds a house deserves more praise than the house itself. For every house has a builder, but the one who built everything is God. Moses was certainly faithful in God's house as a servant. His work was an illustration of the truths God would reveal later. But Christ, as the Son, is in charge of God's entire house. And we are God's house if we keep our courage and remain confident in our hope in Christ. That is why the Holy Spirit says," here we go, guys, "Today when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as Israel did when they rebelled, when they tested me in the wilderness. There your ancestors tested and tried my patience, even though they saw my miracles for 40 years. So I was angry with them, and I said, their hearts always turn away from me. They refuse to do what I tell them, so in my anger I took an oath. They will never enter my place of rest." Verse 12, "Be careful then, dear brothers and sisters. Make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving, turning you away from the living God. You must warn each other every day while it is still today, so that none of you will be deceived by sin and hardened against God. For if we are faithful to the end, trusting God just as firmly as we did when we first believed, we will share in all that belongs to Christ. Remember what it says, today when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as Israel did when they rebelled. And who was it who rebelled against God even though they heard his voice? Wasn't it the people Moses led out of Egypt? And who made God angry for 40 years? Wasn't it the people who sinned, those corpses that lay in the wilderness? And to whom was God speaking when he took an oath that they would never enter his rest? Wasn't it the people who disobeyed him? So we see that because of their unbelief, they were not able to enter his rest. All right, so looking back at verses 7 through 10, it says this. That is why the Holy Spirit says, today when you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as Israel did when they rebelled, when they tested me in the wilderness. There your ancestors tested and tried my patience, even though they saw my miracles for 40 years. So I was angry with them, and I said, their hearts always turn away from me. They refuse to do what I tell them. So in my anger, I took an oath. They will never enter my place of rest. So specifically dialing in on verses 10 and 11. So I was angry with them, and I said, their hearts always turn away from me. They refuse to do what I tell them. So in my anger, I took an oath. They will never enter my rest. And this is what I want you guys to think about. When the author says, their hearts always turn away from me, they have to be turning towards something. What is it in their hearts that they are turning towards? They're turning away from something. So what are they turning their hearts towards? Go ahead. You got the microphone? What is the author saying specifically about these people, right, and their hearts? What are they turning their hearts back towards and away from?
Righteousness.
Sorry, speak up.
Righteousness.
Righteousness, okay. Anybody else? What are they turning their hearts towards?
So having their heart towards the Lord and turning it back towards the flesh, like things of the flesh that appease them, as opposed to putting their rest in the Lord.
Okay.
When we keep chasing after things that aren't of God, He eventually gives us over to them. That's kind of how I take it.
Okay. That's good. That's what the definition of the wrath of God is when He hands us over to our own selfish desires. So that's a good point. Go ahead.
Didn't Israel get sent to the wilderness because they were complaining or something like that, or was
Okay,
that so
yeah.
they weren't grateful for what they had, or I don't really know the full extent of the whole story.
You're touching on it, Cody. All right, very good. So yes, so they were in the wilderness and they were complaining. Okay, but in the midst of their complaining, what were they saying? What were they complaining about? And what did they say would make it better? Go ahead.
Wasn't it not having enough bread? They weren't eating enough or
Okay.
something like that, and they weren't grateful for whatever God was.
Okay, go ahead, Jake. I want you guys to think about this, because this is it's very symbolic, I should say.
If I remember
Very
correctly,
symbolic.
if I remember correctly, they were complaining about everything, and they were wanting to go back to Egypt. They were saying it was better in Egypt.
Boom. They were wanting to go back to Egypt. All right? Okay. So could it be that they were more comfortable, right, with where they were at, what they were used to, and what they felt made them whole? Go ahead. Pick it up.
Made me think about something I seen the other day on Facebook. It was a picture of like a lion, and it's got it in a cage, and it has water gave to it, it has food gave to it, it's got security, but at the same time it showed like another picture of a lion that had freedom and it had to work for all these things. But the one that was, at the same time, like in our minds, we feel like because we have all these freedoms and everything's given to us that it's better, but in reality we're in a cage. You know what I mean? We're slaves to something. So
Yeah. And what I'm trying to wrap your guys' minds around is that it's natural for us to want to resort back to the things that made us comfortable, to the things that we would find wholeness in, right? For years, right, we did things our way, right? We developed a mindset. We found wholeness in everything outside of God. And so what happens is when we come into the program, Life Changers, or we graduate the first year, right? And we still have all these decisions and choices, and we have all these rules and policies over us, right? And we begin to resist against them, right? Or we don't agree with them. We want to immediately go back to what we used to know, what makes us comfortable. It's the same thing when somebody comes into the program, right, and they don't like what we're doing here, okay, and they make the decision to leave. Why are they making the decision to leave? Because they go back to what makes them feel comfortable, not even realizing that they're going right back into Egypt. They're going right back into bondage where the Lord delivered them from. And so I think we need to understand that this is an example of how we can fall back, right, into that old mindset and begin to operate in that old behavior if we are not careful. Go ahead, Mark. Microphone.
I notice I see a lot of people, they hide in sin because they enjoy. They don't want to get out of that. They like on a lot of these fundraisers. I see people coming by the tables. And they really just want to acknowledge you. They don't really want to look at you, but they want to keep doing what they're doing. They don't want to surrender. They don't want to lay that down. And once they do, then they can have a change in their life. And we can be able to help them if we can.
Okay, go ahead, Jacob.
So I always like to say, known hells are preferred to unknown heavens. We don't know what God is going to have for our lives. So what's comfortable may not be good, because we have to walk in faith knowing that God's going to give us something better. But sometimes it's easier just to go back to what we do know and what is easy you know, because we don't know what's lying ahead for us if we just walk in obedience.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say that after 20 or 15 or 10 years or 30 years, man, we become creatures of habit. You know what I mean? We get so used to doing things our way for so long. It's our way. So anytime you try to bring change, right, to somebody who's not used to and they feel resistance, immediately when they get their heart can get hardened if they don't agree with it. And then what do they go back to? They go back to what they know works best for them. They go right back to what makes them feel comfortable. They go back to what makes them feel whole, right? Instead of enduring through process, right? Learning to accept this new thing head on and learning how to navigate through that until they get that revelation of what that means to them, right? And that's the most difficult thing when we learn how to become, and we learn it as we walk as new believers. It's hard, you know, not trusting the unknown. It's difficult having faith. There's some, I mean, I think that's why God gifted certain people with the gift of faith, you know, because most of it probably don't have it, you know. And so when we do this, naturally we're going to feel a resistance. And then if we don't continue to be obedient, right? If we don't continue to develop our relationship with God, spend time with the Lord through prayer, worship, study, and things like that, then what happens is through our lack of obedience, we end up rebelling against God. We end up not being able to operate in that place of rest where God has promised to us. And then ultimately we go back to what we know. We go back to Egypt, so to speak. So, all right, let's pick it back up. So a question that I have for you guys is, what is it in your life that you keep turning back to because of your lack of wholeness and relationship with God? What are the things in your life you're not willing to give up that is causing you to, quote unquote, rebel against God? Let's talk about it. Let's be vulnerable for a minute. I'll repeat the question. What is it in your life that's keeping you, what is it in your life that you are keeping, I've completely phrased this question wrong. What is it in your life that you keep turning back to because of your lack of wholeness and relationship with God? And what are the things in your life you're not willing to give up that is causing you to rebel? Go ahead.
Time, like it's my time. You know, like I want to keep my time, use it my way, not give it to the Lord, not pray, not read the Bible, not give it to the guys that I'm helping lead, but I want my time to myself.
Okay. That's good honesty. I feel it. Is this going to be a very similar answer? It's good. Come on, man. Let's be honest with ourselves, guys. For real, we got to look at this stuff.
As like a 26-year-old man, being surrounded by men 24/7 and not having like a girl and being single for 22 months, that's kind of like something that's pretty hard to like, you know, stay faithful with. That's for sure. Kind of makes me want to go back out and like, you know, yeah.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not saying this to call you guys out. Because we got people live streaming. You know what I mean? I'm for real. Listen, first of all, listen. This is not a destination, guys. All right? Walking in godliness is a journey. We need to understand that. All right? All right, so we need to not put pressure on ourselves and remember, okay, we've all fallen short of the glory of God. I still do a lot, very much, okay? And so by, you know, answering these questions honestly, it's helping other people and the other, you know, that are live streaming and things like that. And that's important, okay? So go ahead.
You talking about how that they had only known Egypt. That generation had only known slavery. They had only known those things, right? And myself, with that question, I've only known I had a mom, but my dad abandoned me. You know, like why could I not be accepted? So the battle for acceptance is the root of why I was turning to pornography, right? It's because you're instantly accepted. You're instantly wanted. You're instantly can find favor in whatever you want, whatever you choose, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, that is what I kept turning my heart back, because I wasn't allowing God to be the person who accepted me. You know, when you find that true acceptance in only God the Father, then man's acceptance doesn't even matter anymore at all. You know, so that's what my
Yeah.
answer was.
Very good. You got something? Go ahead, Kurt. This is good, guys.
I mean, for me, similarly to James there, you know, the abandonment issues with my father, never meet my father, knowing I had a mother. But every time I start to get close to the Lord over the last 30 years or so, a year and a half or 2 years, you know, getting closer, He's shown me more, pulling me closer. I didn't feel like it was real. You know, I couldn't accept that love, just like kind of what he was saying. Like as soon as I start to feel it, I would turn and run.
Yeah, good. For me, just because you know my career, what I've always done, sales, you know, I always tend to lean on my gifting and ability to create and develop wealth, you know, finances, money, you know, and so it's easy for me to forget, you know, that God is ultimately my source, my provision, and every good and perfect gift come from above, right? And so I begin to lean on my own strength, my own understanding, my own giftings, abilities, you know, the strategy, you know, of putting a list together, you know what I mean, to develop, you know, the funds that we need every single weekend, instead of just, you know, saying, Lord, guide my hand, I trust in you and believe for these finances, and just letting him do it. You know what I mean? Or so many different things. So, but those things keep me away from the time, the necessary time, the adequate time that I need to spend with the Lord, so that way I'm operating in that complete and total rest. Right? Okay. Okay. What's that? No. You got something else?
He said I'm the only one.
Oh, about the girls, yeah. No, I mean, all right, okay. Well, if you guys want, no, okay. So if you want to get,
that, Jake, my wife is in the program and I still can't spend time with her. So
Yeah.
try that one.
yeah, or no. I mean, just to make it, yeah. I too, you know, when I graduated the program, I mean, obviously that was all in the front of my mind. You know, I wanted to be in a relationship. I wanted to have a girlfriend. I mean, it's natural. We're men. You know what I mean? It's we have to understand this desire that we're given for the opposite sex. Okay, it's a God-given appetite. Okay, it comes from the Lord, but it's an appetite to be managed, and that's the one thing that I understand. It's an appetite to be managed through boundaries, okay, and through knowing ourselves, understanding, you know, our lines that we can cross. So yes, absolutely, Jake. I can definitely say that I was there, you know, but now where I'm at now, it's not so much the women, you know, because I'm married, you know, awesome wife. It's the American dream, so to speak. You know what I mean? Having the house and having the job and the extra sources of income and the dependability, you know what I mean, on not having to just rely on one source of revenue. So you got something else, Cody?
So I'm also like very, very lustful, and y'all know the situation with me and my old lady and her like coming down here just to be with me, and here I am having like second thoughts, thinking that I'm gonna find something better, and that's just all like, that's definitely like not of God, and just something that I've been struggling with, and also with like not ever having a father. I feed off of man's praise, and I want to do such a good job and do all this work all the time, and I feed off of people coming to me and asking me to do stuff, and it's like a very toxic thing for me. So that's two of the many things that I
Okay, and so let's stop there for a second. Do you feel like that prevents you from, you know, spending time with the Lord and being whole and be just your life being a living sacrifice to God, to be able to live in that rest because you're more concerned about, you know, pleasing man and pleasing leadership and things like that?
A lot of it stems off of my own selfishness, so I'm also trying to build my own kingdom in a sense, because
Okay.
I came here to do all this stuff for me, and to completely give yourself to God to get that stuff. Seek first the kingdom of heaven, and you'll be given everything. That's like such a hard thing for me to grasp, because I feel like I have not the power, I don't know how to say it, but I mean, I'm capable of doing anything, but doing that through God is what I struggle with. I don't know. I don't really know how to.
No, that's perfect answer. Selfishness is the root of it, okay? And if we go back to what I originally stated when I first opened up, is that we were created for God and we're not created for us. But we want what's best for us, right? We want all these things in our life that we feel is going to make us whole. But the trick of it is, and it's not even a trick, it's just a promise, Matthew 6:33, not cliche. If we do seek him, if we do spend time with him, if we do devote ourselves to him as a living sacrifice, all those things, not only do they come, but they come without strife. They come without toil. They come without, plowing. They come from rest, because it's the anointing of God, the favor of God, the favor of man over your life. But see, our minds, we have it all backwards, right? Because of what we came from. Used to doing things ourselves, the way that we were raised up. And so that's why we're learning how to be a disciple. We're learning how to operate in that place of rest and not from that place where we're working by the sweat of our brow. And that's what we're doing.
Like, the kingdom is so opposite.
Stuck.
It's remembering too, like the kingdom is opposite. We strive for works when God is really like rest.
Yeah.
We strive for victory when really God is like just surrender.
Yeah.
There's everything is backwards, and you see it. I mean, coming out of weekends, like just like watching your thread from fundraising. You're like, if you have 4 weekends of fire stores and you're like, I'm getting money. You know what I mean? And then you have one weekend where it's like you're not. It's like, we need to leave this store. We need to never come back here. Something's up with this place, right? And you think that it falls on you, or there has to be another reason why it's not good. You know what I'm saying? And it's the exact opposite on the other end. If you get like a fire bonus, it does really, it's like, are you out there to really push and to get what God has for you that week? And if not, just be happy with whatever you get. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, is like finding the rest in that middle place.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. It's all right. No, this is good. I'm wanting you guys to think about this, because I can sit here and I can read you a teaching and you guys get nothing. But it's like when you're hands-on, when you apply it, that's when it sticks. So I'm happy that you guys are engaging.
So not only do I want like a big bonus, of course everybody does, but I have the expectation that I think people expect from me going to those stores. So if I'm not feeling like I'm measuring up to what I think I'm capable of, that's when it's like you told me to stop and pray with the guys. As soon as I did that, man, like I start getting sour, bitter, start maybe slightly being rude to people because no one is wanting to talk to me.
Yeah.
And I get more madder. And I feel like it's like something, and it's in the spirit. It's definitely.
This happened
like,
after you prayed, or this was before you prayed?
No, like
before.
leading up to
Okay.
that. Then my bag was short, and it was just like a chain reaction of events that all
Yeah.
stemmed from me being selfish and not doing what I think everybody expected of me to get the praise or to I want to be the best at everything that I do. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not like a healthy mindset to have.
Good. Very good.
So I found myself this weekend just kind of like went to a store where I got a lot of, I got you last time. I got you last time. And I sat there, and by the end of Saturday, started to almost kind of get in my head a little bit, right? Didn't mean to, but we're flesh. We accidentally have that happen. And then at the very end of the day, God sends a guy to my table that came up out of the blue, just over from another store, said, God told me to come pray for you. Came, prayed for me, gave me a $100 donation. Said, God said, you're doing the right thing. You just have to stay in his will. And man, did it like really check me. Like I really felt really guilty for even doubting that I'm there for the right reasons. And sometimes God will just send that little check if you allow him to do it. You know what I mean? And that actually, I will go forward from that moment remembering that for the rest of my life, that even when we don't think God's there, God is there. We just need to keep living our life and walking in his will, and in our obedience, God will answer.
Yeah, very good. All right, so another question I want to ask you guys, and we're going to read a little bit more, is I want you to think about this as I read. So what is it that ultimately causes us to not enter into God's promised rest for his people. Let's pick it back up in verses 16 through 19. It says, "And who was it who rebelled against God, even though they heard his voice? Wasn't it the people Moses led out of Egypt? And who made God angry for 40 years? Wasn't it the people who sinned, whose corpses lay in the wilderness? And to whom was God speaking when he took an oath that they would never enter his rest? Wasn't it the people who disobeyed him?" So we see that because of their unbelief, they were not able to enter his rest. So the question I asked was, so what is it that ultimately causes us to enter into God's promised rest for his people? And the answer is disobedience through unbelief. And it's unbelief that always causes us to turn back to what we knew before knowing God. People, places, things, behaviors, in the image of who we used to be and not who God says that we are. Sure. Disobedience through unbelief. Question is, so what is it that ultimately causes us to not enter into God's promised rest for his people? Answer is disobedience through unbelief. And it's unbelief that always causes us to turn back to what we knew before knowing God. People, places, things, behaviors in the image of who we used to be, not who God says we are. All right, we're going to go over to chapter 4. We're going to spend just a couple minutes here. New Living Translation. That's where I rarely teach out of New King James or NIV. Sometimes I teach out of the Passion, like when it comes to Proverbs and stuff like that. Okay. Hebrews 4, 1 through 10. Let's go there. Starting verses 1. God's promise of entering his rest still stands, so we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience it. For this good news that God has prepared this rest has been announced to us just as it was to them. But it did them no good because they didn't share the faith of those who listened to God. For only we who believe can enter his rest. As for the others, God said, "In my anger I took an oath. They will never enter my place of rest, even though this rest has been ready since he made the world." We know it is ready because of the place in the scriptures where it mentions the seventh day. On the seventh day, God rested from all his work. But in the other passage, God said, "They will never enter my place of rest." So God's rest is there for people to enter, but those who first heard the good news failed to enter because they disobeyed God. So God set another time for entering his rest, and that time is today. God announced this through David much later in the words already quoted. "Today when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts." Now, if Joshua has succeeded in giving them rest, God would never have spoken about another day of rest still to come. So there is a special rest still waiting for the people of God. For all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. So let us do our best to enter that rest. But if we disobey God, as people did of Israel, we will fall. If we just go right back up to verses 8, it says, "Now if Joshua has succeeded in giving them this rest, God would have not have spoken about another day of rest still to come." Verse 9, "So there is a special rest still waiting for the people of God." Verse 10, "For all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did from after creating the world." This is your example right here. For all who have entered into God's rest have rested from their labors, just as God did after creating the world. So what he's saying here is that there's rest in whatever you do, right? In your daily activities, just through, the encounters that you have with people, in counseling, interacting, pouring out. There is a place of rest that you can operate from 100% of the time, but it only comes by knowing God. It only comes by spending time with God. It only comes by living your life as a sacrifice to Him through worship, through prayer, through meditation, and taking that devotion time seriously. Because if you do not do that, and I'm here to tell you, hands on, if you guys don't spend your adequate amount of time with God, then when you start dealing with situations through your daily activities, right, and you don't have that word inside of you, you don't have the Holy Spirit leading, guiding, direct you, if you don't know what the word is saying, then you clearly cannot hear what the word is saying when He's trying to guide you. And then what's going to happen is you're going to get tripped up through bitterness, offense, and all these other things, right? And then what's going to cause to happen is it's going to allow the enemy to get a foothold in your life and cause torment. And torment, guys, is not a good place to be. I can tell you right now, it is a miserable place to be. And there's no way out of it. The only way that you can get out of torment is by going back to what you know works. Going back to your first love. Going back to spending time with God. And not just, an hour a day, chalking it off on your checklist. It comes through serious meditation, spending time with Him, trying to get that word inside of your heart, and then applying it in your daily life. If you don't, you're setting yourself up for failure. And I know that there's plenty of you guys here that completely agree with me that they have been in that place in their mind where they are just ate up with torment, couldn't figure out a way out, and probably have put you in a position to where you've either made bad choices or you were getting ready to make bad choices. And I'm just want to encourage you guys today, if you are there, if where I was just not a short time ago, not a long time ago, you need to spend time with God. Don't think of it as a cliche. Don't just chalk it up as this is something that my leadership wants to do. This is for you. This is personally for you. If you don't do this, you're never going to get free from that. For real. Quit trying to find your rest and your wholeness in everything else besides God, and find your wholeness in God. Get your rest out of spending time with Him. And when you do that, you'll see it's going to produce good fruit for your lives, and it's going to keep you out of that place of possible torment. I think I had one more thing to say. Oh yeah, verse 1. God's promise of entering His rest still stands, so we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience it. Man, that is so real. I cannot emphasize that enough. God's promise of entering His rest still stands, so we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience. I don't know about you guys, but when I was in that place of torment in my mind, I literally, I felt like I was going crazy. And I could not, for the love of me, figure out how to get out of that place. I was walking around here just ate up, offended, pissed off at everybody. I didn't want to interact with people. I thought, this place was nuts. And the leadership with it. But then after just getting to that wall, where I said, you know what? I'm going to spend time with you, God. And because it's not about what they want out of me. It's about what you want out of me. And I devoted an hour after an hour, and I spent time with Him, and I just sat there. Eventually, the Lord delivered me from that place of offense in my heart. He delivered me from that place of torment in my heart, and I was able to finally rest again, And to experience that rest after all that torment, I've never felt something so refreshing in my life. And you guys have to understand that this is a reality of what we're walking in now. We can't treat this as mundane. We can't treat this as these are just, that this doesn't mean anything or it doesn't count as anything. Because the truth is this is your life, okay? And if you want to stay in a place of offense, and if you want to stay in a place of torment, that's on you. You know, but I encourage you guys, and I'm plead with you guys, don't do that. Because all it takes is just some simplicity of spending time with God, devoting yourself to the Lord, taking a couple hours out of your day seriously for your heart, for your soul, for your well-being, right? And then all this other crap, man, it goes away. But if you don't, I can assure you that you guys are going to be in that place of torment, and that is not a healthy place for you to be. Not for the ministry, but more importantly, not for yourself. Not for yourself at all. So, anyways, I hope you guys got something out of that. It really helped me over the last couple days, sincerely. And all right, that's it. So, Lord, I thank you so much for what you've done here today. I pray, God, that these men here will learn how to act in obedience to what it is, Jesus, that you're guiding them to every single day. How through meditation and prayer and through just devoting themselves as a living sacrifice and just giving you a small portion of their time can help them out so much throughout their day and throughout their lives. By you know, taking this walk with you seriously will keep them out of the hands of the tormentor and keep them into that place of rest, Jesus, where they're able to function and flow and operate as true sons of the living God. So we bless them today in Jesus'